Good afternoon, Mr. Mediator, Jean and Constance Vernon. My name is Lisa Cline. I represent the defendants, Lindsay, Luann Crane Traeger. The Crane Traegers' position is that the facts and the law demonstrate that the parties never formed a contract for the sale of Riot Foods. Instead, the parties formed an option contract to allow the Crane Traegers a trial period operating Riot Foods and to prevent the Vernons from selling the business to another buyer. The facts demonstrate that the common law of contracts applies, not Article 2 of the Uniform Commercial Code. Section 2-102 of the UCC states that Article 2 governs transactions that deal in the sale of goods. Riot Foods is a business. Black's Law Dictionary defines a business as, quote, a commercial enterprise carried on for profit, a particular occupation or employment, end quote. Another legal dictionary defines a business as, quote, any activity or enterprise entered into for profit, end quote. Section 2-105, subdivision A, defines goods as all things that are, quote, movable at the time of identification of the contract for sale, end quote. Not only does Riot Foods encompass an activity and an enterprise, it also contains rights and privileges, such as a trademark and a name. Further, Riot Foods has contracts with vendors and events. Activities, enterprises, rights, privileges, contracts, none of those are movable things as described under Article 2. However, Riot Foods also contains movable items such as a truck and servicing trailer, refrigerators, kitchen equipment, and signs. Thus, the transaction between the Vernons and the Crane Traegers is a mixed transaction of non-goods and goods. Courts have developed the predominant purpose test to determine if a transaction is primarily for goods or non-goods. The test's factors are the contract's language, the supplier's nature of business, and the intrinsic worth of the materials involved. Here, the parties agree that the oral contract on August 20, 2016 provided the Crane Traegers with the opportunity to work at event locations secured by the Vernons, as well as the use of the truck, trailer, and all necessary equipment. The contract's language suggests that the contract was primarily for the right to use Riot Foods' name and event contracts, with the equipment being part of that usage. The second factor does not apply because the Vernons are not suppliers. Concerning the third factor, used concession trucks on eBay sell for an average of about $20,000. Given that the food truck was probably the most valuable good in the transaction, the total amount for the value of the goods was likely much less than $170,000. Additionally, if the Crane Traegers were not seeking primarily to use the non-good elements of Riot Foods, they could have just rented a food truck and trailer and the necessary equipment. The Crane Traegers did not do this because they were seeking the valuable name, reputation, and contracts that make up Riot Foods. Because this transaction was predominantly for non-goods, the common law of contracts governs this transaction and not Article 2. The common law of contracts for contract formation requires mutual assent supported by adequate consideration. Mutual assent consists of offer and acceptance. Here, it is not clear who, if anyone, made an offer to sell or buy Riot Foods for $170,000. Additionally, Luann Crane Traeger refused to sign anything until she received notification of loan approval. Thus, the facts do not demonstrate the presence of an offer or an acceptance. Additionally, a $15,000 down payment with no assurance of the supposed balance of $155,000 would or even could be paid does not represent adequate consideration for the complete transfer of Riot Foods ownership. Thus, no contract for the sale of Riot Foods for $170,000 existed. In the alternative, if Article 2 governs this transaction, even the UCC's relaxed guidelines for contract formation do not demonstrate that the parties had a contract for the sale of Riot Foods for $170,000. Section 2-2043, subdivision 3 requires that the parties demonstrate an intent to contract for a contract to exist. Jean Vernon testified that the Crane Traegers had not secured financing required to purchase Riot Foods when the parties entered into the oral agreement, nor when the Crane Traegers began operating Riot Foods. Mr. Vernon also testified that the insurance and titles to the truck and trailer remained in his name after the Crane Traegers began using Riot Foods. Additionally, Mr. Vernon assisted the Crane Traegers at a quarter of the events that the Crane Traegers attended with Riot Foods. Mr. Vernon's actions do not reflect those of a party who had sold his business, but rather those of a party who was allowing a potential buyer to complete a trial period. Moreover, the Crane Traegers had not secured financing for $155,000 when they contracted with the Vernons for the use of Riot Foods. Additionally, Luann refused to sign anything that would require a financial commitment on the Crane Traegers' part. Thus, the Crane Traegers' conduct does not indicate an intent to purchase Riot Foods. Mr. Vernon's employment with Riot Foods does not necessarily demonstrate that he no longer owned Riot Foods. Small business owners often pay themselves employees. In response to plaintiff's counsel's comment that the parties did not have an option contract because the parties did not have a signed contract under Section 2-205 of the UCC, the lack of such a document does not preclude the presence of an option contract under the common law of contracts. Therefore, the Crane-Traeger's position is that Article 2 does not govern this transaction, and that the parties had an option contract for a trial period for the use of Riot Foods for $15,000, not a contract for the sale of Riot Foods for $170,000. Thank you.